Hi, this is William Henderson,
This is B. McGraw.
and this is part 2 of our episode on ag policy. But I think at a basic level, politically, I just think it's very difficult to see these subsidies getting removed because, Wyoming's not really a farming state. It's more of like a ranching state. But Wyoming has less than 1 million people. That's the point I'm trying to make is you have a very small population that has 2 senators. And California has more than 30 times the population and it has the same representation in the Senate. And so, just think of all the farm states, like Illinois. Well, Illinois has a bigger population, but Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, North Dakota, South Dakota, et cetera, et cetera. There's just so many states that rely heavily on these subsidies. So I just don't see a politically feasible way to actually get rid of these subsidies.
Yeah, I mean, also, I think it's one of those. It's hard to hate on agricultural subsidies. Kind of like it is hard to hate on infrastructure bills. It's well, we all ride roads. Same with agriculture. It's whether or not you're a farmer or know any, I eat food. I would like it to not be expensive.
Yeah,
gotta keep growing food.
I mean, if it's subsidized, though, it's not. I mean, you're still paying for it. It's just through your taxes. I guess it's a redistributive effect where the people who pay more taxes, which is usually high-income professionals, are subsidizing lower prices for everybody, including poor people. But poor people also have direct subsidies through food stamps. Maybe you'd be. Although I typically like. This is editorializing. I do like supply subsidies more than demand subsidies.
I think they're better.
But anyways, this graph shows, basically subsidies dropped to basically below 3% by 1988. And now it hovers close to zero in New Zealand. And the US is actually lower than it used to be. It was in the sort of 25% range in the late 90s, but now it's around a little below 10%. So actually, if you consider these subsidies a problem, which is a debate itself, but if you do, it's actually getting better in this country.
It is lower than it was then. I saw that.
So the biggest, the most valid argument in support of these, in my opinion, is national security. You don't want to get blockaded and then everyone starves to death during a war. Because there are countries that are net importers of food that could not survive if they were blocked off from.
They could basically get sieged.
Yeah. So essentially, and I feel the same way about industrial subsidies, which are not really a thing.
I feel at a minimum, the stuff that makes it less risky to be a farmer is hard to hate on in general.
That said, though, the percentage of the population that does farming now is basically the lowest it's ever been.
I mean, so much of it is automated, especially when it's giant farms.
Well, yeah, it's largely automated, and even people who do farming, a lot of what they do is basically owned by a larger company. So they might own the land, but the DNA of the livestock they raise is owned by an agricultural company. So they technically don't own their own animals, which is kind of interesting itself. But basically what happened in New Zealand is that it says after some difficult adjustments, a more efficient industry emerged. New Zealand has about the same number of people employed in agriculture today as it did in the pre-reform era. Productivity has quadrupled. There was also indirect positive impact on the environment. It says New Zealand does not use export subsidies or domestic support for any products. And essentially, this article says, this article basically shows that, New Zealand, still is not, it didn't become food insecure because of the loss of subsidies. It still has enough food to feed itself. I mean, granted, it's a very small population with a lot of land. So, you kind of expect that to be the case. But still, it is an interesting case study where they actually tried this and things turned out fine. I talked about the farm collectivization model. I mean, I don't know if we need to go into detail.
Not a lot of people are going to defend that one.
There are some tankies online who you'd be surprised.
It'd be way easier to do collective farming now that it's way easier to do it.
Yeah, but it's still just a misalignment of incentives. Like if we requisition everything you have, like you're not going to produce anything, basically.
Yeah.
So pros and cons. So pros. So one pro is it makes prices more stable. So it potentially does. It's hard to really know for sure unless you remove the subsidies. A big question mark is like, couldn't a lot of the finance industry cover a lot of this? Couldn't they use futures to cover for price changes?
Insurance? I mean, that's what they used to do, didn't they?
Yeah. I mean, like soybean futures, that type of thing still exists. Couldn't you better diversify? So one argument is like these subsidies basically incentivize monoculture farms. It's like, hey, if I get paid for these crops, I'm only going to grow those crops. So maybe you could help reduce the risk of ruin by just growing multiple types of crops. So if one crop fails, well, you have other types of crop or like if one, the price tanks, you still have other crops that would do better. Insurance, the thing with insurance is there's always like a certain level of catastrophic risk where like the insurance market kind of fails. You see that in the housing market with a lot of like hurricane stuff or like flood insurance.
So if we ever had like a drought or something.
Yeah. Yeah. So if there was a mass drought,
risk.
If there was some mass drought, it would probably overwhelm a private insurance market. But, question mark is like, why couldn't a lot of this be covered by the finance industry right now? In fact, that's kind of like how the finance industry became a thing. It was providing financial products to farmers initially.
Oh yeah, that's right. Well, I know that was a lot of the early products.
Yeah. And then you said, why are prices still so high?
Yeah, I mean, everyone's going to complain about it. It's like, oh my God, my grocery prices are still so high. Is it corporate greed?
Well,
is that the answer?
Is it greedflation? Question mark.
Is it greedflation? That's right.
So prices are higher than they were, I don't know, like 5 years ago, whatever. But if you compare prices now to like 1980s, 70s, 60s, food was, especially groceries were quite a bit more expensive back in the day.
Like of an average person's paycheck?
Yeah, yeah. So if we're saying why are prices high, that's why are prices high compared to the recent past, like the past 5 years, for example. And, frankly, inflation, I mean, the inflation of the past few years is a broad-based inflation, which is typically because of monetary reasons. Frankly, we increase the money supply, If you increase the money supply through... So in the aftermath of the financial crisis in 2008, there was a lot of quantitative easing. But number one, that was in the face of a huge slump in demand. So that it was kind of like competing forces. And so that's why prices didn't go up a ton. But also, like, most of that money went into shoring up the balance sheets of banks rather than going directly to, like, consumers. And so when you kind of increase money into the money supply, it basically increases prices where you put the money, essentially. So when you put money into, when you put it into the capital markets, then, the price of things like stocks and like houses goes up. But if you put it directly into people's paychecks, then the price of goods usually goes up. I mean, we just put in a ton of money into the system. There were also supply chain issues.
Oh yeah, that was a big part of it.
Yeah, COVID supply chain issues. There's also shifts in like people, during COVID, people demanded services. And then all of a sudden after COVID, people demanded goods way more than people expected. So there was a lot more to that story. Anyways. Yeah. So that's kind of beyond the scope, even though I spent like 3 minutes talking about it. Domestic production for wartime. I feel like this is a semi-legitimate.
Yeah, that's definitely pretty legit. You got to be
you
got to be a little self-autonomous.
Well, and like this is, I feel the same way about industrial subsidies. So
Mm-hmm.
I think so. I was actually researching. I was curious about this, and we've already done an episode on industry, but the amount of actual stuff we produce per person in terms of like industrial, industry factories, per capita, we create more stuff in the U.S. than we used to in the 1950s. The difference, there's a couple differences. One, it's a lot more automated, so more of that, profit goes to the people who own those companies, and there's not as many employees.
Yeah.
But number two, like the rest of the economy has gotten so much bigger. So like as a percentage of GDP, manufacturing is shrinking, but a lot of that is because things like services, things like software, things like, finance have gotten so much bigger. I mean,
yeah.
So a lot of like, and also unemployment is quite low. So there's not that many workers available to take these jobs. And also factory jobs now, I mean, factory jobs do exist in the US now. They're not like the sort of like, I think a lot of the nostalgia for factory jobs is that, it's like, hey, I can have a blue collar job and afford a house and raise like 5 kids on just that wage. But like factory jobs exist now, and those jobs can't do that now. And so there's bigger forces like deunionization. Fewer and fewer people are in unions. Housing is more expensive because of supply constraints. Healthcare is more expensive also because of supply constraints. Education is more expensive because of demand subsidies. So I think there's like bigger structural reasons. But one area where I really think industrial subsidies make a lot of sense is in national security. Like it is insane that like so many of most of our high-end chips are made on an island off the coast of mainland China.
Yeah.
That's wild.
It is pretty
That's
nuts.
absolutely wild. So, and there's a lot of industries like that. There's like, but basically I think national security, it makes sense, I think. You added a comment here. We kind of talked about this already.
Oh yeah, we definitely talked about this. You just can't get rid of farming subsidies because it's, political suicide since rural areas control so much influence.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. 100%. I mean, I just don't see a realistic path politically to getting these removed. It's kind of interesting. So when it comes to cons, we were talking about this a little bit. So one is obesity. I mean, so, like why do we have a lot of obesity in the US? Part of it is like we live an active lifestyle. The cities, we did an episode on zoning. We did not do an episode on urban design, which I want to do, but like basically people don't really walk. You go to a job, you sit there for 8 hours, you drive home, and then you sit in a chair at home for the rest of the day, and then you go to sleep. And then part of it is just like we have very high portion foods, very sort of calorically dense, nutritionally sparse. And a lot of that comes from carbs, a lot of it from, things like corn and stuff like that. And, other countries have a lot more like vegetables that are a lot lower density, a lot less calories per, mass or whatever, the sort of metric is. So does it cause obesity? I mean, I think I didn't find a specific paper, but I think there's a previous episode that shows like, food high in these sort of, especially these subsidized crops does increase obesity. So, I mean, I feel like this is a pretty obvious, I mean, I think there's other things that influence obesity, like stress levels, etc. But,
generally eating more than you burn off is what causes
it. I think it's pretty obvious that this contributes to obesity. Like I think
if you're drinking your sodas, yeah.
And then you have this conspiracy here.
Oh yeah. Well, let's see. We already talked about corn, seed oil lobbies. So doing the research on this, I came up with a new conspiracy that the way that they're actually going to bring down grocery prices is by introducing GLP-1 drugs to take away everyone's appetite. Take away the demand, the price goes down. Do you think they're going to start introducing it into our water?
They're going to GLPify our water supply.
Yeah. As soon as they take out the fluoride, the GLP-1 gets in.
So, anyways.
Obviously, yeah.
This is all...
I'm going to bring this up online whenever I like to...
here.
Yeah. This is a brand new conspiracy that I made up with no facts just now.
So, planting monocultural crops, we talked about this. It makes things less resilient. That's a con.
That's another bro science thing right now, is that we need to get away from the monoculture crops and do more of the what's it called, the sustainable
agriculture.
Yeah, the sustainable agriculture, or regenerative agriculture is the word that I always see thrown around.
I guess I have a few questions. So so the most extreme version of this is like vertical farms, which we've already talked about.
Yeah, that one's dumb. But I think the regenerative farmers are like combining their livestock land use with the crop land use and not growing the same thing over and over again over the same ground.
Well, you have maybe you have the animals feed on these fields, and then their droppings are used to fertilize the fields, and then use cover crops, and then I heard a big people didn't like was like, what's it called when you plow a field and you aerate it?
Oh my gosh. I know what it is, but I can't remember the name.
I guess just plowing a field, right?
Yeah, I think it's just plowing the field.
But I mean, so the reason you do that is it's easier to grow crops when there's oxygen in the soil. But then
that's also really bad for the environment because it releases all the. Doesn't that release a lot of carbon or something into the air?
I'm not sure. It does tear up. I guess there's micro ecosystems of different critters that get killed when you do that. I mean, this is way beyond my pay grade. I don't know. I mean, how do you do? Because the big question mark I have is if you can do sustainable farming at the same price, why don't people do it already?
Well, that's the big question is what would be the additional price? Maybe that's the argument going forward.
Yeah.
That will get you killed by the farming lobby is you subsidize farms that are regenerative or whatever and find some way of regulating that.
I think methods that dramatically reduce yields would be a non-starter because that's how famines happen. But if it's we can still have the same yield, it'll just cost a tiny bit more. That might make
because there's going to be more work involved, or there's more logistics around it. Yeah.
But is this politically feasible? It's hey, we're going to, all your groceries are going to go up by 10% because we're going to make things more regenerative. People will be oh, I totally I'd be okay. But I feel a lot of people would be pretty upset by that.
Yeah. If it caused their prices to go up.
Yeah. I mean,
here's what the is other thing is, so there's a lot of, agriculture is probably one of the largest, or agriculture and industry causes the most climate change harm. I mean, it releases a bunch of.
Well, I know with animals,
especially with livestock. Is anyone making the argument that we should target subsidies based on the effect on climate change?
I don't think anyone seriously does. I honestly feel climate change is one of those things that if the scientists are accurate about it, which I believe they are, it'll be pretty serious in terms of, substantial, migrations due to weather, substantial economic damage from hurricanes destroying houses, et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of the day, I don't think people actually care that much about it as an issue. Because the people who care about it are, it's the Maslow's hierarchy. You care about existential things when you have everything else taken care of. Um, and so the people who care a lot about climate change are like usually sort of like wealthy urban dwellers who, go shop at Whole Foods or whatever. Like, but like if you talk, when I, talk to people who are like working class, like they don't really talk. I mean, my experience is like they don't really talk about climate change that much because they're like,
Not
hey,
much.
I'm trying to just like feed my family. So I mean, maybe, but I feel like that's not really a huge conversation.
Well, I guess the
Um,
conversation is more like, should we look into doing anything like, or even like if you're a livestock, or if you have like a beef farm or a chicken
mhm.
farm, like do these small things and you'll get like X% more subsidies.
Maybe, but even in Europe, I heard a lot of there's been farmers protests over the past couple years, and a decent amount of that is because of various, climate targeted, you know, policies that increase costs for farmers in certain areas.
Well,
So
that's why I'm saying you link it to like an increase in the subsidy to
yeah, I
account
guess so.
for the increase in cost.
Sure, that might make sense.
Yeah.
Um,
All right,
I
we'll
mean,
put that on the next party platform.
the big thing is just like livestock emitting methane, and I mean, the only way to really fix that problem is to like eat less meat, I guess. But that's easier said than done, um, to convince people to do that.
Yeah, you're not going to
Um,
convince anybody to do that. Mike, you'll
so
convince a handful of people.
yeah, I mean, environmental damage. There's like, I mean, fertilizer runoff can like cause algae blooms in the water. Um, like pesticides, like they all have to pass FDA review, I guess, but like maybe some pesticides are not great for the environment. I know with like livestock, there's like the whole, crowding them together so they get sick easily. So you have to give them antibiotics so they don't get sick. You give them hormones so they grow faster. How much of that is bad for people? Sort of an open question. Um, I don't know. I mean, this is sort of outside. These aren't really subsidy questions, but you know, bigger picture questions, I guess, about farming practice, which I just don't know about to really
Well, I think there's a
give.
lot of difference that you can make in farming and industry that you're not going to make the same level of effect like on like trying to like it's probably way easier to find like incremental changes and better environmental agricultural methods than the work it would take to like get everyone an electric vehicle that has a gas
Yeah,
vehicle.
yeah,
I feel
that's a
like
good
that
point.
would be a more bang for your buck. Because I mean, like at the rate, it said you said it was like 10% of the farm receipts were from the subsidies, like, and that
Hmm.
was 30 billion. So
Hmm.
it's not even that big of an industry.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. It's something to think about.
Oh man,
Um,
normally you're the one to editorialize.
yeah, yeah. Um,
I'm just thinking out
so
loud.
the environmental cost, we've kind of talked about that. How much more expensive would food get? So I think we talked about that.
Yeah, we talked about that.
Um, and then the next one, so you wrote that subsidies don't drive.
Down food
Yeah, we
prices
talked
because
about
we
that a
just ship
little.
them. Yeah, well, that's the
Yeah.
whole thing. Like, it's a global market, so it really. But that that's the whole thing. Like, even though most of the oil that we use is from the Americas, OPEC can still screw us over by driving down the global price of oil, and kind of works
Yeah.
the same way.
It's probably, yeah, it's
Oh
similar, I
yeah,
imagine.
and we have some wild, or at least I've heard some wild stories about. Like we do have farms like in some pretty weird places in the American Southwest that take up all of the water of like the Colorado River or the Rio Grande or
Yeah.
whatever. Um,
Well, the percentage, yeah, well, Arizona is the crazy. There's the alfalfa farms that were, I think it was like alfalfa that was used to feed
Saudi
cows.
Saudi
Yes,
cows or
Saudi.
Saudi
Yeah,
horse races or race
it was
horses.
something. It was something weird like that. It's like, why
Yeah.
is there an
Why
alfalfa
is
farm
this
in the desert?
happening? This doesn't feel like this. It feels like a policy failure created this.
Well, it seems strange because it's just like at a very basic level, growing crops in the desert doesn't make sense because all the water evaporates, and you know, I imagine the soil is probably not that nutrient dense, just because like historically you don't have a lot of, because usually the nutrients come from like former dead, you know, plant matter that, you know, decomposes, whatever. So
You
I
see
imagine
that a
the
lot
soils.
though, like when I lived in California, like you always saw farms around the California aqueduct, and I'm like, y'all just not have this giant drought?
Well, that's a bit, yeah. In California, like I think like most of the water actually goes to like agriculture, versus like people using it to drink water, take showers, or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, and
No,
so
no, like
in all,
especially in the Central Valley. That
yeah,
like I remember I always saw political billboards about that when we drove through.
and like almonds, I heard use tons of water. And so, you know, why, I guess like water rights is an entirely different, that itself could be like a podcast episode, although that seems
Yeah.
like a mini episode. But water, you know, because water rights, a lot of times they were just kind of given ad hoc. It's like, oh, well, you get this much, you get to take this much water. And then like sometimes they like over allocate. So it's like the total amount of water
Yeah.
people are like entitled to from a certain river is like more than the amount that flows through the river, which is like kind of a disaster in waiting.
It feels like a debt crisis type conversation.
Yeah.
Like if we keep
Yeah.
doing this, eventually we're all going to be screwed.
Yeah, it is. It is. It seems like some sort of policy failure.
Yeah, maybe
Why
that
are
should be a
there?
mini episode, how to
Yeah,
deal with water rights.
like why is there alfalfa being grown in the Arizona desert? That seems weird.
Yeah.
So I don't know. In a lot of those places, like the aquifers are running dry. Um, there's just like there's a certain amount of water underground, and it's all like going away, and people are like, you know, we'll just kind of keep doing this until like we run out of water, and then we're screwed. But you know, I won't be around when that happens. Um, anyways, the
So you have
corn
a
thing.
note on the ethanol.
Yeah.
Um, it feels kind of weird that that's subsidized when so much corn goes into ethanol.
And then
What uses?
the last comment was
Oh
about,
yeah, I added that one while we were podcasting because I forgot about this. Is um, with the current immigration climate and all of
mhm.
the people not coming in to basically do super low wage labor, are prices going to skyrocket? Like
So
what do you think the quantitative link is between immigration policy and um, agricultural prices?
I'm not sure. I don't know. I feel like this is one of those self-correcting things where like they wouldn't let it get to the point where like prices actually go up a ton. They'll just find like other ways to like keep people here to like continue working. Yeah, that I think that kind of covers it. More straightforward than I expected, in
Yeah.
terms of like what kind of policies are there.
Well,
But
I think there's like some lines of big ag conspiracies about them making us all unhealthy so that they can keep making money growing corn. But other than that, like it's a little bit more simple than we figured.
I don't think it's like they're trying to make people unhealthy. I think it's
I
just
think they
like,
just
oh,
want to
well, I
make
make
money.
money selling
Yeah,
corn, so I want to continue doing that, you know.
yeah,
And it's very easy to kind of, you know, hide from the fact that, you know, that probably contributes to obesity. But you could just be like, oh, that's not true. Like people, it's a free country. People can choose not to, you know, eat Snickers bars or whatever. Um, so, anyways, all right, that was our final episode on agriculture policy. We'll come up with a different topic next time.